Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm your host, Ryan Coonerty. As always, a reminder that An Honorable Profession is a NewDEAL Leaders podcast. The NewDEAL is an organization that supports some of the most thoughtful and innovative voices in American politics. I've been a member of NewDEAL for years, both when I was mayor of Santa Cruz and now on the board of supervisors for Santa Cruz County. You can find us at newdealleaders.org or wherever podcasts are found.
Welcome to An Honorable Profession. I'm Debbie Cox Bultan, CEO of the NewDEAL, where we're proud to support so many of the amazing leaders you hear on this podcast. In this episode, I talked with an inspiring NewDEAL leader, Maine State Representative Ryan Fecteau, who will officially be sworn in this week as the first openly gay man to be Speaker of the Maine House, as well as the youngest speaker currently serving anywhere in the country. Ryan and I talked about these milestones, as well as being the first speaker from his hometown. We also talked about his journey as the son of a single working mother on food stamps to a life in public service where he's made a difference on so many issues, including a successful effort last year to ban conversion therapy for LGBTQ youth in Maine. So Ryan Fecteau, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Debbie.
So good to see you. First, I just want to give you huge congratulations. Earlier this month, I guess, Democrats, your fellow Democrats in the House, elected you to be the new Speaker of the House, and that will be official, I think, on December 2nd when the full House convenes to vote. So just a huge congratulations in general, but in particular, you're making a couple of milestones. You are going to be the first openly gay man elected Speaker of Maine, and you're going to be the youngest speaker in the whole country. So I'm really just so excited to talk to you about that and to find out, how you're feeling about those huge milestones.
Yeah, I mean, very, very exciting. I've been joking by saying that, I'm surprised everyone's making such a big deal out of the fact that I'm the first openly gay speaker in Maine's history and the youngest in the country currently serving as speaker, because for me, the biggest deal is the fact that I'm the first speaker from my hometown of Biddeford in Maine's 200-year history. And so I'm most excited about bringing the speakership home to my hometown.
That is awesome. I love it. We were talking a little bit about just the backdrop you find yourself in here as speaker. We've obviously got COVID raging across the country. We've got an economy to rebuild. We have a long overdue reckoning on race. You're going to take over as speaker in a really tough time, frankly. So tell me how you're approaching that and what you're thinking in terms of what your priorities are going to be.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a challenging time for leaders, not only in Maine, but across the country. I mean, we're facing a large budget deficit here in Maine. Obviously, we have an economy that relies heavily on tourism, and with the mandatory stay-at-home order earlier in the year and just the general fears about traveling, Maine's tourism industry was impacted in an immense way. And thus revenues for the state were impacted in a huge way. So, we have a lot of work to do to sort of navigate these troubled waters and try to find a way forward that, for me, the priority being protecting the most vulnerable in our communities, making sure that older Mainers, for example, who, might be utilizing services such as our, drugs for the elderly program, making sure that their prescription drugs are not immensely expensive. Our children who have access to a number of programs. We only get one shot to make sure children succeed. Really, if we're gonna put programs that they depend on and put those on the chopping block, I'm concerned about the impacts that it would have over the long term. I know it's easy sometimes to think about, okay, we can easily cut these programs and save money in the immediate. But it's also recognizing what the costs will be over the long term to the state by cutting services that, our families are relying on right now, especially during this pandemic, to get by. And these are going to be the challenges that we face.
Yeah. Are you optimistic that there's common ground within the legislature to get some of that done?
Yeah, I'm optimistic because I think, these are the times in which leaders rally together regardless of party affiliation. And my hope is that once again will prove as lawmakers, as public servants, that partisanship is not the thing to put first. In fact, the thing that must be priority is ensuring that our communities, our families, our neighbors are able to get by and to succeed and to stay afloat. And right now, the decisions we're going to be making in Augusta will be about keeping families afloat. And I don't think that's a partisan issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ryan, let me ask you this question. When you're thinking about leading, it's going to be fantastic, I suspect, to have a new administration to work with as a full partner. How are you thinking about that as you look forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a game changer, I think, in many ways, to have a partner in Washington that we can rely on and work with. I have served now in various forms of government. The only one I have not served in is a Democratic trifecta with a Democratic president in Washington. And the last time for Maine, that's been the situation, was back in 2008. So it's very, very exciting that we have a partner in Washington. Just on like basic things. I mean, being able to have someone that takes this pandemic seriously. I was joking the other day that we have a president currently who's occupying the White House who has taken devoted more energy to calling into question the integrity of our election. He tweets about it pretty much every day than he did this pandemic. And I think about, where would we be as a nation if he put as much effort into keeping our communities safe as he has, calling into question the election. We've needed change in Washington desperately over the last 4 years, but certainly this last year has put into perspective just how important that office is. And I'm looking forward to building back better with President Biden and Vice President Harris.
Hear, hear. As you know, we like to talk a little bit on an honorable profession about people's path and journey into public service. And you're so fun because you are so young. I mean, you are 28 years old, but you are in your fourth session as legislator. So you are experienced, but you started in public service at a young age. That's my point there. So I'd love to just think, you've been pretty open about your background and your upbringing. You were raised by a single mom, a working mom who struggled sometimes, learned to read, I think, later than some, and made your way to college first in your family. So I'm first curious kind of about how your upbringing, your childhood, how that kind of impacted your view of, of government or of public service, or, just kind of how you think about that time and bringing that forward into you serving now.
Yeah, I mentioned in my speech to my colleagues during our leadership caucus that my experience growing up defined and led me to being a Democrat. I mean, all the things that, our party believes in and fights for were experiences that I had growing up. For example, we had food stamps. I mean, we had the actual food stamps that you had like in a booklet, not the EBT cards that are plastic now. But we depended on those. I mean, that put food on the table, and by no means was it enough, but it did put some food on the table. We had an unreliable beat up car that would cause lots of headaches. Some days would work and some days would not. We were relatively food insecure. My mom is still a low wage healthcare worker, and when we talk about minimum wage and the fight for a living wage, like these are real issues that I have seen up close and personal. I've seen my mom struggle to make ends meet, to be in tears when the rent was due at the end of the month. And we lived in low income housing, and like even low income housing doesn't necessarily set a monthly bill that is affordable. And so we have so many things that I think collectively we care about as Democrats that I've had the lived experience of facing. And so, yeah, I mean, when I think about the pandemic and the challenges that we face in the upcoming year as legislators, I know the families and what they're facing, because that's my family. I've been there.
In so many families right now, frankly, and it's so important to bring that experience to bear. Maine's lucky to have you. Tell me about, you got to high school, and I think something happened in your high school that kind of opened your eyes, I read, to the kind of possibility of public service in the sense of agency, that you could make a difference and make a change. What was that experience?
Yeah, so for some reason, I have no idea to this day what possessed me, but there was a teacher that came around to my biology class and offered students the opportunity to apply to be a student representative on our school committee. And I had transferred from another school district, the next town over, and so I was still very shy, did not have very many friends, and definitely politics was not something I had at all an interest in. But for some reason, I was compelled to apply, and I ended up getting selected. And I'm sure they chose me because I was quiet, because they thought I wouldn't cause any trouble. But sure enough, I caused a lot of
little did they know
a lot of good trouble, as the late John Lewis would say. And yeah, we had a school that was falling apart. I mean, there would be days you'd sit in the classroom and the ceiling tile would have filled up with so much water that it would fall down in the middle of class. There was a classroom in the basement level of the building that would literally have a water just spouting out like it was a stream that was running through the walls. It was really, really bad. And of course, with water infiltration comes mold and all those things. And our school district was not eligible for state funding for renovation. And so there was a proposal in front of the city council to put forward a bond to voters for $34 million. For perspective, I live in a town of 23,000 people. So we were asking 23,000 folks here in Biddeford to foot the bill for a school renovation, which was an immense challenge. And my peers and I, we led tours of the school after school every day, and giving folks in the community the chance to see the building, because obviously if you haven't been in school for a while, you probably don't even think about what the school looks like and what students are facing. And we won. Sure. We won. We got that passed. Amazing.
You got the bug. You saw what could happen.
Yeah.
And it really never left you.
Yes.
It never left you. I love that. Sometimes you just need that exposure, right, to understand where you can make a difference. So how did you end up at Catholic University? Of course, I want to talk about your Catholicism. It's something you also wear very proudly on your sleeve. What was your journey like to Catholic University, interestingly, particularly since you were the first person to go to college? It's interesting you ended up out of state and, at a big university like that.
Well, I was pretty obsessed with being in D.C., so I don't think it really mattered which school I ended up at, but I wanted to be in D.C., and so Catholic offered the best financial aid package, and so that's where I ended up. I also did have an interest in being at a Catholic institution, but it didn't necessarily need to be a Catholic institution, but that's where I ended up. So
yeah. Was that the political? Was that you wanted to be in DC because of your this intersection with politics?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And did you, I don't know this, were you able to do internships or something? Did you get some experience in DC when you were there?
I think I had an internship my first semester with the DNC, and then, bounced around my congresswoman, and I took full advantage of the opportunity.
That is so fantastic. I love that. It's important, I think, for people listening too, to understand, again, about public service, just that, getting your feet in the door, having those internships, experiences, that's what eventually makes a career, really. Those are early, things you can find to do and to meet people and to get experience. So that's fantastic. And then you came back right away from Catholic and ran for office literally right after college.
Yeah.
So did you know, even before you left, you were going to come back and do that, or did something happen to make you decide this is the time?
I decided that I was going to run the summer before my final 2 semesters at Catholic. And so, there is a upshot of term limits that, I think they're kind of problematic, but in one instance there is an upshot, which is, there's an opportunity for someone at 22 years old to run for office because the person who was representing me had no choice but to leave office, and she was in her 80s. So just to put it in perspective, overnight, my legislative district went from an 80-year-old to a 22-year-old, 60-year difference in age, and also, funny enough, she also was my neighbor. So the district went from literally one house right over to the other. So it was not
I love
a huge
that. They knew where to
change.
find you.
Exactly.
I love that. Well, what was that like? I mean, you walk into, obviously you're, just talking about you becoming speaker. So you've, earned respect and developed great relationships, but you walk into the legislature as a 22-year-old. I mean, what was that experience like? How did you find that? How did people treat you? What surprised you?
Well, one of the funny experiences was I served on the labor committee, and I was sandwiched in between two Republicans at the Horseshoe, and one of them definitely thought that because of my age, I was going to be suddenly lured into the Republican thinking, which of course I had very much decided, who I was and the values that I had. So his attempts at changing my perspective did not really work all that well, but it was funny to see that, he clearly thought that I was going to change my perspectives just because I was young. But overall, I mean, my experience in the legislature from day one to now has been that, like anything, trust is earned and respect is earned. And I think that I have done my due diligence in proving to my colleagues that I'm capable of handling whatever tasks are assigned to me. And so whether it was, serving as a first-term member or serving as the chair of the labor committee or serving as the assistant majority leader for the last 2 years, I've done what I think is a good job at ensuring and improving to my colleagues that I'm capable and that I can do the job.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing you had great success on was, and some of, again, our listeners may know you for your national leadership on this, that you were able to successfully get through legislation to ban conversion therapy for youth in Maine. I'd love to hear about that experience and for, both in terms of your own decision to make that a priority for yourself and the catalyst for doing something about that, and then also what was it like with your colleagues? Was that was it an easy fight? Was it not? What did you learn about getting something like that through?
Yeah, it was interesting because I put this bill in my second term, and we still had a Republican governor at the time, and the Senate was controlled by Republicans, and so you would look at that landscape and think, okay, this is going to be a pretty uphill battle. We had tremendous success with some fantastic allies in the Senate who were Republicans who came to support the bill. And I guess I learned in that experience just, the importance of not making judgments as to, whom might be supportive and who might not be. And, I think I built with one particular senator, a lifelong friendship and degree of respect because of her support and her she just wasn't a supporter; she was a champion for the bill, and that really meant a lot to me, especially since the issue was so personal. Ultimately, it got to the governor's desk, and our previous governor became the first governor in the country to veto a ban on conversion therapy, even though our neighbors, New Hampshire, their governor had signed, a Republican governor had signed a very similar bill into law only a few months before, or maybe even days before. I can't remember the exact details. So, it was just like such a contrast and obviously pretty discouraging. But we came back a year later, and our new Democratic governor, Janet Mills, signed the bill into law, and the deed was done. This issue was personal for me because I had an experience with a trusted professional who I wasn't subjected to conversion therapy, but was suggested literature from someone who supposedly had gone through conversion therapy and was a, success story, air quotes. And that experience, that experience of having someone that I trusted even suggest that I take up this kind of literature really, really had significant emotional and psychological impact on me. That I felt like if it could have an impact by just having it suggested in terms of reading material, imagine the impact it would have on a young person who would be younger than me. I was like 20 19 at the time, but, 15 or 16 or 17-year-old who maybe just came out to their parents being subjected to this harmful practice and being in such a vulnerable place. I felt very passionately that this is something that should not be practiced in the state of Maine or anywhere. And I hope to see a day when all 50 states ban this practice.
Yeah, I think you were the 17th state. Is that right?
Yeah, 17th or 18th. It was I think Colorado and Maine were sort of competing for which governor would sign it into law first.
Yeah, that's so great. And throughout that experience, I assume you talked to people who had been through, who were dealing with it in Maine. I know when I'm talking to some people, just kind of that it's so powerful to go back to your story about the high school, right? And understanding the difference you can make, right? The connection you're making between, the people who are living this and the fact that you have the power to do something about that and to make their lives better, must have been an incredibly rewarding experience.
Yeah, I think perhaps one of the most touching things was I received a note on the House floor the first time around we tried passing the bill, and I had delivered a speech on the floor, and I received an anonymous note. To this day, I don't know who it was, but they spoke about their experience facing suicide and how inspiring I was to them, and the fact that I shared my own story. And it really just puts into perspective, you don't know when you're in a leadership role like this, you just don't know who's listening and whose life you could be impacting. And yeah, for me, it sort of was it congealed that moment of okay, this is the power of the representation that I have, being so privileged to be sent to the state house by my community.
Yeah, no, I've got goosebumps. It is so important that people realize that, and it's hard sometimes to get through that noise, when there's so much polarization. And I love what you said about not making assumptions about who's going to be with you and who's not. I think sometimes we, particularly in this day and age with the hyper partisanship, the deep divides, we just when we're not even maybe watching the same news programs or whatever it is, we assume we have two different sets of facts now almost. That is just so important, that kind of connection on a human level, and that not. And having that faith that it sounds like you had, that you could find allies maybe in unusual places to get this done. And I think that that's just such an important lesson for all of us going forward, because we've got a new day to build here, actually, which is exciting. And on that front, I would love to talk to you for a minute about Maine more generally in kind of the political sphere. Obviously, people may not know that you're succeeding Sarah Gideon as Speaker, who, of course, ran unsuccessfully against Susan Collins. Many people nationally will know her. And frankly, she looked pretty good going into the final days from an outsider perspective. A lot of Democratic Senate candidates did around the country, and then it turned out on Election Day not to be so. And so I'm curious, from a on the ground perspective, did that race results surprise you, or what should we know as from outside about what was really going on that was not kind of reflected in those polls?
Yeah, first I should say that it has been an absolute pleasure and honor to serve with Speaker Gideon over the last 6 years, and most specifically the last 4 years. I've been privileged to serve in leadership alongside her the last 2 years, and seeing just the grace and fortitude and determination and her persistence and just her stoicness. She is just an absolutely dynamic and amazing leader, and our state would have been very fortunate to have her representing us in Washington. And I know that there are amazing possibilities ahead for her. She's still a young leader, and someone that I think will have a bright future in Maine politics or wherever she ends up. Well,
and she inspired a lot of people around the country, I'll just say too. So, not just in Maine, but yes.
I'm glad we were. I'm very thankful that we were able to share her with all of you for the duration of the campaign. I wasn't surprised by the result necessarily. I think Senator Collins has built a really a reputation here in the state that is concrete in many ways, and getting through that that reputation that she has, I think, was very difficult for Sarah's campaign, trying to convince Mainers that Susan had changed, which we know she had, because we had seen the number of votes that she had taken that she probably maybe would not have taken years before, and certainly her lining herself up with President Trump, just really discouraging, and not the Susan Collins that I had known, someone that I felt like was not interested in partisan politics, but rather, and not interested in allegiances to presidents, but rather doing what's right for Maine people. But ultimately, she had a reputation. She has a reputation here that I think was very difficult to dissolve, and ultimately, I think helped her win re-election. But also the other aspect of things, Donald Trump was driving out people to vote for him as well, and so you had that down ticket effect, which obviously is reflected in the fact that we lost a couple seats in the House as well. So it was I think two things sort of at play: Susan's reputation, which was hard to dissolve, and then Donald Trump driving out voters who perhaps traditionally don't vote, but felt like he was the guy for the job.
Interesting.
Again.
And it's so interesting too, because it sounds like in Maine, like in a lot of places in the country, there was this assumption that high turnout just equaled Democratic votes, right? And I think that myth has been shattered a little bit. I mean, and we should all be happy. We are all happy that we will still be the party of high turnout, because we believe in making sure people have a voice. So we're not going to make it a political calculation. So that's good no matter who people vote for. But I do think it's interesting that kind of was not the way that it played out with the high turnout. Donald Trump got a lot of votes, more votes than anybody in history besides Joe Biden, right? Interesting. But back on your point about the House and you losing a few seats, just what do you think? What do you take away from that kind of going forward, not just looking backward, but going forward in terms of how you think what it means to govern? I guess, as speaker, what does it mean to govern in a state where you have the majority, but you did lose some seats last time, and you've talked a lot about trying to work across the aisle and find common ground. Like, just tell me about kind of how you're thinking about that in this context.
Yeah, I'm very thankful that we retained as many seats as we did. I kind of had short-term memory loss, because in 2016, things were far worse for us after that. And we usually consider presidential elections great for Democrats. Well, 2016 was horrible for the Maine House. We had a very slim majority, and I'm very thankful that we have the majority that we do. And then you look across the country, again, look at New Hampshire. They really had a red wave that impacted their state legislature. So in perspective, I'm very thankful for where we're at, but we have to do a better job of communicating to our constituents in some of these rural districts. I mean, the districts that we lost were definitely working class rural districts, areas that maybe are still mill towns or former mill towns, and we're losing traction with the Democratic message, which I think ultimately is helping these districts and helping these towns and helping these folks, but we've lost ground, and we have to. I think as Democrats, we have to rethink. How do we communicate with folks in rural areas who don't see us as the party of solutions? Why is that, and how can we win them back over? Because I think we are the party of solutions, but we're clearly not doing a good job of communicating that. In terms of what we face over the next 2 years with our majority in the House and in the Senate, I think over the last 6 years of serving in the legislature, so much of what we do is relationship built, and I think communication and being clear and honest, and those are the founding principles for me in terms of leadership. I'm going to tell the minority leader in the House exactly what I think. And she's going to know where I stand on the issues, and I hope she does. I feel confident that she'll do the same for me. That we will be clear communicators with one another, and that is a very strong starting point for a relationship that will be successful in terms of our leadership together. I chaired the Joint Standing Committee on Labor with a Republican senator, and we had a very good working relationship because of the very things that I just mentioned. So I've been tried and tested in this regard in terms of working through tough issues. The Labor Committee, as you can imagine, is not a policy committee that deals with very easy legislation. We had some tough battles, but we were able to work through them, and I think we ultimately came out with some very positive results, despite the fact that we were serving in divided government at that time. And I think some of those same principles will apply to the next 2 years, and hopefully we'll have worked together well and done some things that we can look back on and be proud of. Both me and the minority leader are termed out after this one, so hopefully we can look back fondly on the last term of service and be proud that we did good.
Yeah, well, it's an important one, as we talked about earlier, about the backdrop. You mentioned the divided government. I think Maine's it's still a trifecta, is it not?
Yes.
Which is interesting, actually, because I think people think of Maine as a swing state and not a bright blue state anyway. So how does that factor into kind of your thinking about how you get stuff done with the governor and both houses?
Well, certainly it'll make some things a lot easier. So that there's definitely a lot things that will be far easier than if if we had lost a chamber or didn't have Governor Mills in the Blaine House. So there's definitely some advantages, and I'm very thankful. What's interesting is the state Senate did pick up a seat. So Democrats picked up a seat in the state Senate. We lost 7 incumbents in the House and 2 seats that were open seats that we had previously held as well. So ultimately 9 seats altogether. So it is interesting to see that, that dynamic at play where we lost seats, but the Senate picked up a district. So it's a good sign for Democrats. There's still hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, there is. But I think you're right about, and we're going to, this is something I think that at the New Deal we'll spend some time talking about, is this question of, how to bring back people to the fold, particularly in rural districts. And I mean, obviously our messages are not resonating. And I think we need to take that seriously, and we need to not figure out how to, scream the same thing louder, but how do we really listen to their concerns that are real about their fears and their worries about the economy and health and a whole bunch of things, and just talk to them differently, right? So I think that's going to be a huge challenge for us going forward as a party, and as a country, because right now we've got to be about uniting the country, right? I mean, we've been through 4 years of division. That's not working for anybody. So we need to, have a different tone and a different mindset, which it sounds like you're already thinking about for Maine.
Yeah, and I mean, these are folks that are concerned about the future of industry that they've built their livelihoods on, and I think that's really the thing that we need to keep in mind, regardless of party. It's these are families who face uncertain futures, and any family, would be concerned about that, and they want to vote for people that they feel are listening and are going to fight for change. And I think part of the problem for Democrats has been we have been seen as sort of the establishment in a way, and Trump represented that upheaval. And what we need to, I think, communicate to folks that are in these districts or in these communities where the future is uncertain is that we're not okay with the status quo either. We're not just gonna sit here and watch idly. We're gonna take action to make sure that these communities have bright futures, and that means rethinking the industry that is there, trying to retool it, getting folks trained for the future workforce. Here in Maine, we have some exciting things happening around solar energy and wind energy, offshore wind. Those are going to be good paying jobs. It's just a matter of retooling and getting folks trained to work in these industries so that there's a future in rural areas that are sustainable and not built on a false premise that the job of yesterday is going to be there forever.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to end with a couple questions back on kind of the public service pieces of things. One is, I really have so much admiration, honestly, for people who are in public life right now. I mean, we've seen through the, whether it's the governor of Michigan, some really horrific, kind of, it was all, it was always a sacrifice, I think, to put yourself out there and be out in the public, held to scrutiny and all those things. But, this kind of vitriol we're seeing, with governors and mayors and others around the country, particularly in the, in the spirit of COVID, masks, other things. But just this idea that, people should be, doing their jobs, and are subject to this kind of thing. So I'm curious about, for people who are in public service, how you're feeling about it, and what's still reward. You just ran for re-election, or you just ran for speaker, so you're clearly staying in it. So both how does it feel, and what is it that's so rewarding to you about being in public service that you're willing to take those, the negative that comes with it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a constant with with having naysayers and negativity, and you sort of account for that. And what keeps me going is when the positives happen, and those are far brighter stars than these rare moments where folks are really quite negative, or there's vitriol in our politics. And so, for example, over the last several months, especially at the beginning of this pandemic, I started to reach out to older folks in my community, and just to check in and see like what they needed and how things were going, and just listening to the fears that they had, and in some cases, because people were staying apart from one another, they hadn't had conversations with even their family members, and it was just like an opportunity to listen and hear what they needed. But I quickly found that they needed help getting groceries because they were fearful of going out to the grocery store and putting themselves at risk, and also going to the pharmacy to pick up their prescriptions or whatever it was. And so I started just going grocery shopping for them, and quickly I realized I was not going to be able to do it alone. And so I posted on Facebook, and a number of people responded positively to helping out. And soon enough, I had like an army of 12 to 14 volunteers who I could pass off a grocery list, and they would go out and pick up groceries. And there was one lady in particular. Her name is Mrs. Hodge, and she was just so thankful, and sent in a list almost bi-weekly, to the point where I became an expert on what it is she would want from the grocery store more than I knew what I myself would want from the grocery store. So it was really rewarding in that sense. I also brought a woman to her cancer appointments. Just really puts into perspective, like, okay, there is, first of all, with Thanksgiving, here and upon us, it's like there's so much to be thankful for. I feel relatively safe going to the grocery store. There are members of our communities who don't, and how profound that is. And we think about the debate over masking and whether or not to wear a mask. It's like there are literally people in our communities who don't feel safe going out into public at all, let alone going out into a public space where there's people who are so inconsiderate that they're unwilling to simply be inconvenienced by a face covering. And so, we have so much happening in the world, but there are definitely some bright spots, and there's some positivity out there. And that was certainly a big highlight for me over the last few months, and keeps me going. That's what we do this work for.
I love that. And what I love about your answer is that the answer you gave is actually something that someone can do whether or not they're in public elected office. So they can,
yes,
so there are ways to serve whether you're running for office or whether you are not. As a last question to that point, is there any advice you'd give to young people who are thinking about a career in elective office, not just public service, but running for office? Anything that you would tell them to be thinking about, or advice generally?
Yeah, I guess plainly, it's never too early. Clearly, you can run for office, you can get involved. I mean, my first foray into elected office was serving on a charter commission. I ran unopposed because no one else was interested in it, and I did so while I was still in college. And I called into some meetings and came home for meetings as well. Like, there are opportunities to serve your communities. There's boards and commissions that often go unfilled, and I think it's more important than ever before. There's so much happening locally, statewide, nationwide, globally, and young people need to be at the table because it's our futures that are on the line often. And if you're dissatisfied with what's happening, it's kind of like what President Obama would say. Don't boo, go vote. In this case, don't boo, go run for something.
I love it. Well, what a great way to end that. I mean, it's going to take all of us to build back better, as our new president-elect says. And I really believe that. I'm so grateful for your service, and we are all grateful for your service. I know, because I work with leaders across the country every day, that there are so many bright spots out there about people doing fantastic work. You among them. And so I thank you. Thanks for being on the show today, and thank you for the work you're going to do the next session. Very excited to be working with you to help you in any way we can over the next couple of years.
Thank you so much. I'm thankful for being on the show today, and look forward to the work ahead.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to An Honorable Profession. Please subscribe to hear more amazing leaders, and keep asking your elected officials to be honorable. Boots Row Group produces podcast. I'm Ryan Coonerty, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars were used in the making of this podcast.